the military budget. What shall we do with all that money? Build more bombs or teach our children? Join our work for justice. Hooray, up we're rising. Hooray, up we're rising. Hooray, up we're rising. Everybody
the total debt of all 50
us.
state governments today is $130 billion. That's with a B, billion dollars. The U.S. will spend $170 billion with a B just this year alone on our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and now Libya.
If Martin Luther King's assertion had a seed of truth then, so does it now. The war spending is far and away the largest item on our annual budget. 60% of our tax dollars this year will go to pay for our wars of today and of the future. And for evidence of our spiritual decline, consider the following. The drones, operated by military personnel safe in a sanctuary in Nevada, taking the lives of all too often innocent civilians in the far reaches of Pakistan. Consider the gruesome and disgusting photographs that we have seen of the so-called trophies of American GI kill teams in Afghanistan. Consider the torture and the denial of due process that a young military man has been accused of, who has been accused of exposing, only accused of exposing military atrocities. Consider the continued imprisonment of poor souls, perhaps guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, some for over 9 years in Guantanamo, and the fact that a recent ruling by a federal judge has declared that evidence may not be required to keep these people enduring this hideous nightmare. Consider also, finally, the civilian lives lost to U.S. and NATO aircraft or airstrikes in Libya, all collateral damage. Martin Luther King spoke of the facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the evisceration of the social uplift programs of the 60s, and that it compelled him to see the war as an enemy of the poor. And so it is today. And the evidence for that, which attests all the more to our spiritual decline today, would include the wealthiest 1% of families in the United States controls 1/3 of the nation's wealth. And worse than that, the 40% at the bottom control less than 1% of the nation's wealth. Our people also consider that our people suffer the highest infant mortality rate of any industrialized developed country. Consider that teachers are being laid off by the thousands. Consider that across the country there is an assault on the common man's collective bargaining rights, a tool through which the inequitable distribution of wealth might in part be addressed. These endless wars must stop. Our troops must be brought home, and our tax dollars must be spent on the needs here at home. Dwight Eisenhower said it in 1953, and for me it's something of a mantra. He said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who are hungry and are not fed, from those who are cold and not clothed. A world at arms is spending not money alone, it is spending the sweat of its laborers, it's spending the genius of its scientists, and it's spending the hopes of its children." Thank you very much.
Taxpayers in the state of Maine have reached into their pockets to the tune of $3.4 billion to fund the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Some of this was funded with our federal income taxes, and some of it was borrowed against our future income taxes. The $3.4 billion figure does not even include the annual budget for the Department of Defense, or include most of the cost for operating the more than 800 military bases around the globe. Spending on active military, not even counting the price tag for much-needed care for veterans, has climbed to well over 50% of discretionary spending by our Congress. How can the steadily accelerating drain on our resources not affect the fiscal health of the people of Maine? The wishes of the people should have an impact on federal fiscal issues.
When I first heard that President Obama was proposing cuts to the Pell Grant system in his 2012 budget, I was appalled. He proposed a 15% cut from the maximum $5,500 grant that a student can get, while at the same time increasing funding for security programs such as Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, and military construction. Financial aid needs to be a priority for the federal government. I have friends who have dropped out of school because they cannot afford to pay for it. I have friends, myself included, who pick schools on how much the school offered them in grants, not on desire to go there. And I have friends from high school who simply chose not to go to college because they couldn't afford it. In the fall of 2010, a study done by the Cato Institute and the organization Taxpayers for Common Sense found that without harming our troops or national security, we could safely cut $100 billion a year from the Department of Defense budget. Failure to invest in higher education will result in a society that is less productive, less inventive, less competitive in the global economy, and in the end, less free. This is the direction that the United States is heading in, and changes need to be made, and they need to be made fast.
I have worked at Bath Iron Works for the past 30 years, but you already know that. Building destroyers for the United States Navy. After observing all the armed conflicts these Bath-built ships have been engaged in, protecting against threats to our way of life, I have come to the conclusion that the greatest threat to our national security, world stability, and humanity as a whole cannot be controlled by military actions. Why are we wasting all this precious money, time, and lives on endless resource wars when oil is the problem? The U.S. Armed Forces consume about 14 million gallons of oil per day, half of it in jet fuel. Humvees average 4 miles per gallon, while an Apache helicopter gets half a mile per gallon. The modern military machine cannot operate without oil and spends about half its budget securing fossil fuel in hostile lands. The cycle of oil dependence, weapons production, and resource wars is plain to see. We need a paradigm shift away from oil and endless resource wars. We also need to encourage manufacturing industries like Bath Iron Works that there is a future beyond weapons production. 80% of the homes in Maine heat with oil. When oil reaches $200 plus a barrel, and we do not move forward and utilize a cheaper, more sustainable power like solar or wind, Maine will be uninhabitable. Maine workers at Bath Iron Works could build the deep water offshore wind turbines now under design at the University of Maine. The plan is for up to 1,000 of these turbines to be carefully placed out of sight offshore in the Gulf of Maine. They would supply power to the whole Northeast. We could double the workforce at Bath Iron Works and related industries and have clean, affordable, and sustainable power. We could also build high-speed rail cars and systems. Mr. President, bring our war dollars home.
Bring our war dollars home. Bring our war dollars home. They're in the hands of fools. They like war rules. Bring our war dollars home. Endless wars, trillions spent, countless lives left alone. It's long past time to voice dissent and bring our war dollars home.
Bring our